pro Stunde über die Philippinen bezogen. Meteorologen zufolge nähert sich bereits der nächste tropische Wirbelsturm. Er könnte am Freitag oder Samstag auf Land treffen.
Ah. Morgen, Raul. Hörst du mich?
Hm.
Morgen.
Guten Morgen, grüß dich, ich kann dich gut hören.
Sehr gut.
Wie geht's? Bist du aufgeregt?
Ja. Klar, also es
Lass mich
haben
noch.
sich 316 Leute registriert.
Gut, das ist super. Du hast schon auf das Ereignis starten geklickt, sehe ich.
Ja, also ich
Das
weiß
heißt
nicht,
also,
ja,
das heißt jetzt, jeder kann einfach dazukommen. Das ist nur, dass du das weißt. Normalerweise
genau.
startet man das Ereignis erst pünktlich.
Ach
Ähm,
so.
Dann warten alle noch im Eingang und dann, wenn du bereit bist, kannst du draufklicken, aber das ist auch okay.
Okay, ja, das wusste ich jetzt nicht.
Nö,
Also
gar kein Problem. Ist ja auch nicht
das
wild.
heißt, die sind dann alle im Wartebereich und kommen dann rein.
Genau, jetzt ist es aber so, jetzt kommen alle direkt rein.
Ja, ist okay. Ähm, und das wird auch aufgezeichnet, habe ich gesehen.
Das wird aufgezeichnet, ja.
Ist das automatisch oder haben wir das so eingestellt?
Gute Frage. Das ist, willst du, dass es aufgezeichnet wird? Ja oder nein?
Ja, also wir hatten gestern ein kurzes Projektmeeting dazu und die Kolleginnen und Kollegen finden es ganz gut. Und ich habe jetzt schon gedacht, also wir teilen die Folien dann auf EDU4Standards, klar. Und dann sollen die auch das zurechtschneiden, dann, dass man dann auch die Videos hat.
Nee, das passt dann. Dann lassen wir das so, wie es ist.
Ja. Also das ist so ein bisschen die Idee. Hast du eigentlich den Fraunhofer-Kollegen das damals gegeben? Nee, du hast die Folien von mir nicht gekriegt, oder? Oder wie
Nee,
war das?
nee.
Okay, dann kann man das nochmal, kann ich das nochmal teilen, aber beziehungsweise man kann auch die teilen. Ja,
Also das war ja auch als erster Test damals gedacht. Deswegen.
genau. Ja, schauen wir mal.
Kameras für alle zulassen, oder?
Ja, ich habe da nichts gegeben. Das Problem ist, wir werden, also die Fragen sollen halt dann im Chat gestellt werden. Ähm, damit das ein bisschen dokumentiert ist. Wir können hier keine große Interaktion ermöglichen. Das wäre jetzt hier in einem kleinen Kreis möglich gewesen, aber das
Also
ja.
um bei 200 Leuten entsprechend dann nicht dafür zu sorgen, dass dann irgendwie die ganze Zeit was eigentlich aus Versehen aktiviert wird, könnte ich auch die Mikros für alle sperren, wenn das dir
Ja,
hilft.
das würde ich auch sagen. Das macht keinen Sinn. Ähm, also dass wir jetzt damit mit Wortbeiträgen, weil sagen wir so, ich habe genug Folien jetzt und das ist jetzt schon gedrängt und wie gesagt, wenn Fragen auftauchen, bitte reinschreiben, dann
Mhm.
hat man die schon mal dokumentiert, auch wenn es irgendwie andere Inhalte gewünscht sind, etc., etc.
Gut,
Äh,
dann würde ich jetzt die Kameras für alle Gäste deaktivieren, sowie die Mikrofone.
genau, nur für mich halt
Gut.
nicht. Sehr gut, vielen Dank. Also das kannst du dann auch machen, ja.
Genau. So, jetzt sind alle deaktiviert. Keiner kann sich zu Wort melden.
Okay.
Keiner kann entsprechend seine Kamera aktivieren. Allerdings, der Chat ist nach wie vor möglich.
Ja, das finde ich halt wichtig. Also. Und kann man denn aus dem System rauslesen, dann wer dann am Ende dabei war?
Das müsste im Nachhinein auch gehen.
Oder muss man da, ich weiß, es gibt dieses Protokoll, muss man das so,
Ich glaube, das kannst du im Nachgang runterladen.
okay. Ja, spannend.
Also, ich denke, so wird es klappen. Ähm, Jetzt bin ich nur noch nicht ganz im Klaren, was jetzt der Unterschied zwischen einem Chat und einem FAQ ist.
Ja, diese FAQ ist, dann kann man Fragen stellen und wenn die dann beantwortet werden, geht es wieder weg.
Ach so, okay. Dann lasse ich den FAQ mal aktiv. Mit denen habe ich jetzt noch keine Erfahrung gehabt.
Erlassen, das kann ich, also wenn ich ex post dann Fragen beantworte, dann kriegen die Leute ja die Message, oder?
Das kann durchaus sein. Das, wie gesagt, ich habe mit FAQs noch nicht gearbeitet. Ähm, Insofern, ich lasse jetzt einfach mal den Chat und FAQ zulassen,
Ja.
zulässig.
Aber bei den anderen Events bist du auch Co-Organisator, glaube ich. Ich habe das, glaube ich, überall eingestellt. Da muss ich
Ja,
nochmal
klar. Das stehen wir zusammen durch. Ja, aber vor 250, 230 Leuten habe ich auch noch nicht gesprochen.
Aber wir hatten, glaube ich, bei diesen also Webinare, Präsentationen zu dieser Open Source Studie während Corona, da waren, glaube ich, mal 500.
Auch gut, auch gut.
Also ich muss jetzt niemanden reinlassen, die kommen jetzt
Nein,
alle.
die
Gut.
kommen. Wir haben schon 5 Teilnehmer in der Runde. Das siehst du wahrscheinlich.
Naja, das sehe ich.
Ich würde jetzt auch mal mein Mikro und meine Kamera ausschalten.
Aber mich sieht man noch, ja.
Dich sieht man.
Gut.
Also wenn irgendwas nicht funktioniert, dann melde ich mich.
Ja.
Aber dann wirst du das auch wahrscheinlich im Chat mitgeteilt bekommen. Kannst du den
Ja.
lesen parallel?
Jetzt muss ich mal gucken. Ich hab minimieren. Ich sehe jetzt halt nur die Teilnehmer. Aber ich teilen beenden. Ich muss,
Nee, nee, lass das mal. Das ist
nee,
jetzt
wir lassen das jetzt mal so stabil und dann gucken wir mal, was passiert.
never change a running team.
Nee.
Ähm, was du noch machen könntest, falls du auf deinem Handy auch Teams installiert hast, dann kannst du das parallel damit lesen.
Ach so, nee, das ist bei mir irgendwie, ich habe das nicht hingekriegt.
Nö, nö.
Ja, ich muss in den Chat noch die Homepage von EDU4Standards packen. Das habe ich jetzt vergessen. Aber egal. Das kann man
Äh,
auch noch.
du kannst auch eine Rundmail anschließend noch schicken. Auch das geht an alle Teilnehmenden.
Über das System.
Ja,
Okay.
habe ich noch nicht versucht, aber das soll gehen.
Okay.
Wir haben 314 Registrierungen.
Wie bitte?
314 Registrierungen.
Vorhin waren es noch, glaube ich, mal 16. Kann man sich auch deregistrieren?
Das kann man auch absagen, ja.
Hätte
Oder
ich
vielleicht
das
hast du
mal.
vielleicht hast du auch die Teilnahmen gezählt. Das heißt, dann waren bei den, da sind wir zwei nicht dabei gewesen. Das erklärt die Differenz von 2.
Okay. Aber kann man das nicht einfrieren? Also, dass man
Ähm,
das, dass man die zumindest hat.
Das hat damit zu tun, ob die Leute dann entsprechend vielleicht den Termin nochmal kurzfristig absagen. Dann wird die Registrierung damit auch zurückgezogen. Das macht Teams dann automatisch.
Okay.
I think we should now switch to English when we
Yes.
talk. Otherwise,
Yes.
the
Yes.
others are getting worried that this will be a German presentation.
No problem. I think but I'm going to start quite sharp at 9. Because I think the people have reserved the hour and we have to stick to the hour and
Definitely. I'm going to turn off my microphone on camera.
okay, then talk to you later. Thanks.
Someone mentioned they can't hear a sound. If you can hear us, could you give us a thumbs up? Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, good morning. A warm welcome from Berlin. From my side, Knut Blind is my name. I'm head of business unit innovation and regulation at the Fraunhofer Institute for System Innovation Research, and I'm also professor for innovation economics here at the Technical University in Berlin. Yeah, thanks a lot for your participation in really the pilot, the first webinar within the pilot of a series of webinars we are conducting in the context of the EDU4Standards projects, focusing on researchers working for EARTO organizations. Therefore, I approach you via your scientific publications under the affiliations of one of the other members. Fraunhofer is one, TNO and others, but then this has been further distributed by various supporters of the topic of standardization. We have 1 hour. It's a little bit tight. Therefore, the exchange works via the chat or the Q&A section. Please use that also with critique, questions, suggestions for other possible topics. The event here today is in the context of EDU4Standards, and therefore I give you very briefly an overview of the project. This project is a Horizon Europe project, and the owner is DG Grow. It's not DG RTD, just as an information, because the intention is really to empower standardization in Europe through education, because what we see is that the topic is getting quite high on the geopolitical agenda. That means we have trade tensions, and it's not only about the customs and tolls Mr. Trump is pushing, but also standards are key elements for trade. Therefore, within the European standardization strategy, it has been identified that we have also to look at the people doing standardization, and therefore this was an element of the standardization strategies launched in 2022. And in this context, there was a call for proposal, and we put together a consortium, which I'm also the coordinator of. And we have several objectives. That means we develop teaching material about standardization, and I will share later, or maybe how you can do that, the link to the EDU4Standards homepage, where also then the slides will be shared. You will get then an email with a link to the slides. It means we also are organizing academic standards days, and if you are interested in doing that, please connect to the European Standardization Committee. Then they are responsible that we are trying to increase the number of higher education institutes and universities which offer courses. We want to increase the number of teachers, and also a students association will be set up. But today, to be brief, we are focusing on the pilots, and one pilot is pan-European ones. Other pilots are addressing bachelor and master students in company training, summer schools, etc. But we are looking here with the focus on people working in EARTO organizations. That means we have different levels, and the first 2 webinars are more for really the beginners. Therefore, we talk a little bit about the landscape in standardization, which is, as you will see later, a little bit complicated. But this is the baseline. The lecture next week will focus on the different function of standards. And then the lecture number 3 is then more at the intermediate level, because here we address the link to research, where we are in, or most of us, and IPR. And then the really sophisticated 2 lectures are on the link to open source, standardization open source, a very difficult relationship. And finally, we conclude with the geopolitical aspects and values. That means that's the agenda for the next 6 weeks. Monday and Thursday morning, 9 o'clock. I hope it's not too early. Yeah, the lectures will be done by myself. We have 2 guest lectures. I'm very happy to have on the open source topic Mirko Böhm. Mirko Böhm is head of Linux, the Linux Foundation in Europe. Therefore, he's really the man in Europe regarding open source, at least from a Linux perspective. And for the last lecture, when we also talk about European values and ethical aspects, Barbara Reiter, a colleague from the University of Graz, is going to join me. Now, but let's go into the topics of today, the standardization landscape. What are we going to talk about? I will really briefly introduce that, and then some basics of standardization, looking at different standardization organizations, and then we are getting a little bit to the landscape, because there are different layers, different types of organizations. Therefore, finally, we are also looking at the linkages, which are quite diverse and also very context specific, as you will see later. If somebody is interested to have a kind of a closer look at the stuff, what I'm going to present, especially in the lecture of today and also next week, there's a textbook provided by ETSI, the European Telecommunication Standards Institute, where there are also some questions, etc. You can look at. In the later lectures, then also quite some stuff we did, because we are also doing research in the topic, will be integrated. And you will also see this book is from 21. It means we are four years later. There might be a next edition in 26, but this is not clear yet. Now, what are the objectives? First, it's very important to understand that standards are not regulations. That's very important. Then we have different types of standardization organizations, but we have also links. Standards are also referenced in law. This is also a topic. Then we have the formal organized, recognized bodies like ISO, you might know, or CEN. But then there are also some industrial consortia which are important, and they sometimes also interplay. Also, de facto standards play a different role. And we have also different kind of regional levels, and there are some coordination and agreements which try to organize the landscape in a proper way. The landscape is quite rich and complex, and there are different organizations. They also produce different documents. We might go into these different documents maybe only in lecture number 3 when we talk about research, because here specific documents which are maybe interesting for us as researchers will be looked at. That's First issue. Standardization is a very well-defined process, and we will see in the next slide the different steps in this process. And in general, it's open to individuals or organizations. The openness might be a little bit restricted, because sometimes, depending on your organization and your status, you have to maybe pay some participation fees. But that's very context specific. And in addition to kind of our research community, the standardization process are in general dominated by other stakeholders, especially manufacturers, technology providers, sometimes also regulators and consumer organizations are there. And the idea is to have, with this very broad and open stakeholder process, really a good deliverable at the very end. And one very important kind of document is the WTO kind of a guideline regarding technical barriers to trade, because here they define specific principles which have the standardization organization to apply. in order not to get also in antitrust and cartel issues. And in general, when we talk about these formal standardization processes and the so-called standard development organizations of formal SDOs. Now, at the process of standardization, which is quite similar in the different organizations, that's the one provided by the SETSE book. But if you look at the process in your national organization, like AFNOR in France, and then in the Netherlands, UNE in Spain, or UNI in Italy, we have these following steps. That means first, standardization should be only done if there's a real need. Means that it should be relevant. Industry says, okay, should be a market relevance, but standardization has also other intentions, like maybe contributing to sustainability or to the sustainable development goals. That's then done in the inception phase. In the next phase, then the scope of the standardization project or process has to be defined. That's the conception phase. And also a work plan has to be agreed upon. That means how to do that, because this process lasts often several years. A few years ago it was kind of 5 years. Now we are down to below 3 years. And then there are also specific documents which can be produced in less than 3 years. And then it will be kind of drafted, like you draft a paper, although the structure of standards have to follow a specific kind of table of content, which you have to fill out with your input. And then there is an approval phase. That means the draft will be then publicly available and can be commented by those who want to comment that. And there might be then also a revision kind of feedback loop to be done in order then to get the final approval. And standards are not really kind of set forever. They are also checked after at least 3 years whether they are still valid, and if they are becoming obsolete because the technological progress or the progress in research, or also maybe changing market conditions or changing requirements maybe from the regulator or from consumer organizations, then these standards might be also withdrawn, completely withdrawn or revised in a way to address the new kind of situations. Standards in the past were really kind of mainly addressed to a technical kind of audience. And the idea was to define then characteristics of specific items. Items might be products, materials, but mainly also procedures and processes. And more the topic of non-technical aspects are becoming relevant. And especially now with the booming artificial intelligence and its applications, also human rights aspects are kind of addressed and discussed in standardization committees. Therefore, this is a big challenge, and we might also maybe discuss that and also towards in further lectures and webinars. The idea is not really to have a standard which really fully specify an item or project, but it's more or less the way or the principle to just define minimum requirements in order to meet specific objectives. The objectives could be interoperability. That means if you bring two components together, or you want to have a minimum level of performance, or also a minimum or maximum level of pollution or emission, kind of such objectives which are then specified in standards, but it's in general left open how to achieve these specific objectives. Now, one really important message is that standards should be also very clear and unambiguous. Yeah, that means they should be really easy to understand. That means here that's a little bit the difference to maybe research papers which are addressing a very specific audience and might be a little bit too complicated. But here they should be really easy to understand. There are different parts. Normative parts, which really describe then mandatory requirements, like individual characteristics that the item being standardized has to implement. And there are some informative parts which help to conceptually understand the intention of the standards. The language should be quite plain. That means simple and short sentences. And also the standards should be, the requirement should be consistent, testable, and non-redundant. It means that it's also not the intention to have very lengthy documents. Finally, there should be really well-defined objectives, and it should be not really over-prescriptive. That means here, again, minimum requirements, maximum requirements should be defined, but it should be not really defined in detail how to do it at the end. And then another important message is standards are not regulations. On the one hand, we'll come back to that in a minute. And standards are not really a set of design rules. Means they really do not really prescribe in detail how specific products, processes, services have to be signed. That means standards have a very voluntary character and are not really compulsory from a legal perspective. There might be other kind of perspectives, market and economic perspective. However, the different kind of documents could inspire themselves. It means the regulations are more or less setting the framework conditions for the standards, and the specific implementations in a specific product by a specific company. This could be done by could be inspired then by existing standards. But this is kind of the details are not really part of standards and should be not part of standards. Again, that means standards are not regulations. And the conformity with standards is voluntary, whereas regulations are compulsory. That means an item, product, service, process which doesn't fit to regulations is in general not allowed to enter the market. For example, the single market in Europe. If you are not really complying with European regulations and directives, it's illegal to bring products to the markets, and this applies both for kind of European companies and providers, but also for those from outside. On the other hand, standards here, the non-compliance to standards is not really then a problem to bring products in a market, we had kind of the case of charging systems for smartphones and mobile phones, where the Commission had an idea of how this had to be done, and there was an MOU. And in the past years, and now only really recently, then this kind of voluntariness became then mandatory, because then there was then this shift from a voluntary system then to a kind of obligatory system via regulation. That means also here you see a little bit the dynamics between the different types of documents. On the other hand, as we see later, also with some examples, standards might be captured or integrated into regulations. And there are also some cases where especially also countries outside Europe just take an international standard and implement them as a law. That could be also the case. Therefore, there's also this interaction. And Yesterday, I was at the event here in Berlin, where the German Standards Institute DIN and the German Ministry kind of celebrated the 50 years of the contract between DIN and the Ministry, where it was really highlighted that the regulatory kind of part is part of the government and the ministries, and the kind of implementation and the specification is part of the standards. On the other hand, already mentioned before, standards are not really design rules, and there are different opportunities how then the companies and technology providers then maybe produce standard compliant implementations, but the specific design is their thing, and this is also good in order to keep a variety in the market. Now, looking at the landscape of standardization bodies, here are different logos you might know, and we'll come in a moment to the details here. We in general look at so-called standards development organizations, SDOs, when here these standard development organizations are following specific requirements. First, the standardization process has to follow a very defined process. It should be open, although, as I said before, sometimes you have to pay money to get in, and but the openness is important principle. The other important principle is consensus within all interested parties and stakeholders. Although consensus doesn't mean 100% agreement, that's not what is required. And these processes are inspired, or also there's a little bit pressure to comply to these 6 principles of the Technical Barriers to Trade Committee of the WTO, or the World Trade Organization. And these principles are transparency. That means it should be transparent what's done within the standardization process. The openness, I also mentioned that the impartiality, that means there should be not really a tendency that a specific kind of interest is focused. Then the consensus principle, effectiveness and relevance. That means the standard should really be relevant, and at the end, the implementation should also be affected. The whole kind of should be coherent. Body of standard should be coherent. No contradictions. Does this mean? Also, but this is a little bit the WTO. A specific kind of interest is the development dimension, means that the interests and the needs of developing countries should be considered, which is not so important. And organizations which really follow this formal standardization process, we call standard development organizations. And they act in response to specific needs of industry, but also of society. The next kind of important characteristic is that some of these SDOs are officially recognized by the regulatory system, and we will come to Europe because we have here European focus on how the European Commission deals with that. And these standard development organizations are also called recognized SDOs. Sometimes their standards are also called the US standards, but the US is only correct if specific standards like European standards are directly linked to European directives or the European regulations, and then we talk about the subset of so-called harmonized European standards. At the national level, this principle also exists, but for us here, the European level is more important. And one important regulation which is more or less organizing the European standardization system is the Regulation 1025, released in 2012. This regulation is, just as a side note, is currently it has been evaluated, and there will be some changes. I don't know whether the Commission is able to do that in 26, but so far we stick to that, because here this regulation really gives the CEN, that means the European Standardization Committee, the Electrotechnical Committee, and ETSI, the Telecommunications Standards Institute, the specific role to produce standards which are maybe aligned with European regulations. Currently, there's a discussion also maybe to have an additional fourth standards body, but this we will see. And I also mentioned we have different European regulations, directives, etc. And some of these regulations really they will directly link to specific standards, and I will show you an example in a minute. Besides these officially recognized SDOs, there are also other standards organizations which maybe in your field are also very important, like WCC, which is relevant for some internet standards. Another big organization is IEEE, which is also producing very significant and important standards. They are officially not recognized, but they have also very established procedures, and sometimes the quality of their standards is even better than of the official standards. That's to be known. And here are some examples. Means here the WC is also producing, for example, guidelines for the accessibility to the web, and this is then referenced by official standards. Here, like the European norm 301549, or IEEE, it's an engineering organization, but they have also a standards board, and they are producing the so-called EARTO family, which is very important for local area networks, and then also maybe in the future very important for the implementation of autonomous driving. Now, moving a little bit above the European level, we have the ITU, which is an agency of the United Nations. The other organizations, also ISO, or for example, these are private ones. And then we have also de facto standards. It means these are really standards which we probably all know. And if you are now looking at your like the QWERTY keyboard, if you're looking at your laptop, then you find this kind of composition. This is a layout which has been established way back in the last century, and this has never been changed. That means this is well known. You can even consider kind of the question whether you drive on the left or right side as a standard. But now, being a little bit more specific, another de facto standards is PDF, which was initially created by Adobe System. Meanwhile, it's also an ISO standards, and you can see here also linkages. Then we have the HTML, which was created by Tim Berners-Lee and then published by WCC. And then we have very company-specific de facto standards like Microsoft Windows, which is an operating system more or less initiated and defended over decades now by Microsoft. And we call these de facto standards, and they are in general then at the end decided by the market. And that means there are no official committees which make the decision. Now the markets decide about these standards. And here another concepts come into play. That's the so-called dominant design or dominant position, where kind of the competition in the market eventually decides which standards will survive. And here US scholars introduced this topic more than 50 years ago under the concept of dominant design. That's also possible. For us researchers, these things are not so relevant. But sometimes these de facto standards like HTML or I already mentioned PDF, they become ISO standards after some long time, and then also the character eventually changed a little bit. To conclude this, that means these SDO standards are developed in SDOs. There's an open consensus-oriented process. Sometimes it's a little bit a lengthy process, but then there are also clear and transparent participation and voting rules. Here, just maybe one additional side note. In general, the principle is at the international level, for example, one country, one vote. There are some other organizations like ETSI where the market power of individual companies has some influence on their voting rights. De facto standards are more or less than dominant designs, which are the outcome of a standards war or natural selection. Here, in general, one company kind of pushes that and is also the owner. There are also intellectual property rights on these de facto standards. The process is really an internal one. It's not open, and it's really then driven by single or maybe also a consortia of standards. Now, consortia. That's also an important type of standards bodies. And here are some examples. I know, for example, some also EARTO members are active in AUTOSAR, which is producing standardized software architectures for automotive technology. Other one is Home Gateway Initiative for home architecture, and some other examples. In general, these consortia, with a few exceptions, are very dynamic organizations which come and also then go again when maybe the technological development is finished or markets are changing. Their process is quite light. The level of consensus is lower and compared to the formal process. And sometimes very few players form consortia. In other cases, they are quite big and are also quite open. Therefore, it's really very specific. But here, just to make the distinction, we are not talking about these de facto standards. Recently, a colleague, a PhD from Munich, she did an overview and she found, I think, 500 in the context of mobile communication and did some analysis. And what here comes into play, but this will be addressed in a specific lecture, also that more and more open source communities are also now counted as or considered as consortia. Sometimes, and we will see that later in examples, these consortia are also then kind of in connection with the formal SDOs when there's a kind of an agreement how to deal with that. But we go back now to the formal level just to show you a little bit the structure of the different organizations. At the international level, we have in particular ISO and IEC for the electrotechnical part and ITU for the telecommunication. But also international organizations are IEEE and ITF-WC. Then we have at the national level, like ETSI, for in Africa, ASO, or in the Pacific area, PASC. In detail, there are also some differences. The ITU, as I mentioned before, is an UN agency founded in 1947. It's in general, the membership is member states, and which have the dominant role, and then industry associations come into play. Also, regional organizations, standardization organizations are involved, and academia. They have different sectors, but all around telecommunication. ISO is the broadest and also kind of biggest organization. There have meanwhile more than 170 countries which are involved, and they cover all different fields. But we'll come back to that later. ITF is the governing body of the internet, therefore also international organizations, and they have a specific board which is controlling the world. For Europe, also ETSI is important. The European Standards Organization, is one member, and here the membership is a little bit different. They have specific members, 900 meanwhile, and they are not only European members. They're coming from all over the world. And for example, Huawei is also very active in this organization. Also in Africa, it's also kind of a regional organization. These are the intermediate level. And going then to other standards bodies outside Europe, the European ones we know, DIN in Germany, AFNO in France, NEN in the Netherlands, etc. But here are some other international ones in Canada, Korea, and often they have also different organizations, national organizations within one country addressing different topics. To look at a little bit the division of work between the different organizations, ITU is really focused on telecommunications. ISO is very broad, but also more and more also considering ICT aspects. IC is on electrotechnology, and one important common committee between ISO and IC is the so-called Joint Technical Committee 1, JTC1, which is trying to consider all IT stuff kind of being kind of cross-cutting all the other ISO topics like health, but also now especially AI is a big topic. Then ETSI is for ICT systems, SAN and SANELEC. Initially, was kind of separated. Meanwhile, they say these are the common topics: AI, eco designs, energy efficiency, etc. But if you're looking at the pages, then still they have the difference that SANELEC is addressing other sectors than SAN, but the overall scope is quite kind of the same. Then we have AI, and here especially all local area network specification, especially the 802 family is important. ITF, the internet specifications are there. Means we have this now bringing this together. We have different landscapes, and from the EU perspective, this is from a more recent SEN document. You see in the middle the three European organizations which are linked to the international organization, IFC, ITU, and ISO. And then we have on the national level the member organizations in the European Union, which are not only from the European Union member states, but also Switzerland, Norway, etc. are also included. And then we have ETSI, we will come back to ETSI in a moment, where they have also close links to other standardization organizations and consortia, which are more in the IT sector. And then on the bottom level, here different stakeholders from industry, SMEs, researchers like us are involved. Another example from the IT world is here the linkages in the ICT ecosystems, which have been put together by ETSI a few years ago. This is unfortunately it's not updated, but you see here a very complex relationship of liaisons and agreements. For example, here ETSI has an agreement with ITU. But then there are other linkages to other types of organizations. Means it's very complex in the IT field. I checked for other examples. This is the landscape in the area of nanotech. And on the one hand, you see here ISO and IC, which are working close together. Then the committees at the European level. But here another player comes into the game. It's the OECD, as also an organization which writes guidelines and templates, especially in the nanotech, biotech area. Therefore, you see here really depends where you are. You are faced with a very different kind of landscape. Yeah, to summarize this a little bit, we have these recognized bodies on the one hand, and here important for Europe is this regulation, which addresses the responsibility to sensor neg and ETSI. And then we have these other types of non-recognized organizations. Now, is in some areas like here mobile communication, there is a very important organization, it's 3GPP, created now almost 30 years ago, which brings together standards bodies from all over the world, which are doing kind of standardization work in the telecommunications fields. And the idea is really to avoid a fragmentation on the global level. That means this is a little bit a very specific case. Another not so well-known case is one M2M, which is developing kind of standards in the machine-to-machine context. We have here another set of very specific consortia in the area of IT, where depending on the topic, broadband forum, then here ZigBee in the context of mobile communication, etc. Car connectivity is a topic. They develop, and but this is a very dynamic kind of a landscape of organizations, which is sometimes a little bit difficult to follow. Now to get a little bit into the linkages between the different levels, we already have seen ISO, IEC, and EARTO, sensor neg and ETSI, the regional levels, and then the national one. And I'm just showing you now a little bit the example of Germany, where at the international level we have ISO, IEC, and EARTO, then sensor neg and ETSI. And in Germany, for example, we have DIN, and maybe most of you know DIN as those which are responsible for DIN I4. That means they are doing all the standards works in all area, but we have an additional kind of organization called DKE, the German Committee on Electrotechnology, and DKE represents Germany both in CENELEC, that means the European Electrotechnical Committee, and in the IEC, and that's a little bit separate. DIN is here located in Berlin, DKE in Frankfurt, and that means they are really also a little bit separate. They are not as close as CEN and CENELEC. And finally, DKE is also involved in ETSI, and but not in ITU. ITU, where there are ITU representatives in Germany, for example, is the Bundesnetzagentur. That's an agency of the government. That means here different relations exist. Now, about the linkages. We have here different levels, and they interact also in different ways, following different kind of logics and agreements. We have here in general the national SDOs, and in Germany we have two. In other countries we have just one, but also other countries, I think the Netherlands, for example, they have also two, and some countries even three national ones. In general, then they are organized at the regional level in Europe, here in CENELEC, And then we have the international level with ISO and AC and ITU. And in general, the international standardization has the dominance. That means their rules or their standards are in general those which are then adopted at the lower level, both at the regional, but then also at the national level. That's important. The idea is that the national level brings in their preferences to the regional, that means here in Europe, the European, and at the international level. They also support then the national experts. Therefore, in general, the national kind of body is a little bit the gatekeeper for you also to get into the European and international level. For example, I'm in general not really active in standardization, but now I'm, and I was interested to get involved in a technical committee on data, active at CEN, but I couldn't get in without the approval of the German standardization body DIN. That was the first step. And when they kind of more or less delegated me to the European level, then I could join European activities. That's very important. Now about the collaboration, especially in Europe, there's an agreement, and here at the European level, the so-called work program is a very important document where the priorities are defined. And in general, the rule is there's a so-called standstill kind of rule. The national SEOs shouldn't take really any actions when there is in parallel something going on at the European level. The process in general is quite similar. Important is that when the European standards have been kind of published, then they are transferred down to the national level. To make it a little bit more explicit, how does this kind of work is, we have the 3 European organizations, we have the 3 international ones, and they have different agreements to align the activities. That means between ISO and CEN, there's agreement that when ISO is publishing a standard, CEN is in general kind of adopting this as a European standard. That's the agreement. The same has been done for electrotechnical standards, which are then approved by CENELEC as European standards. As I mentioned before, ISO and IC coordinate themselves in the ISO IC JTC1, which is a really very big kind of technical committee covering all the topics where IT is a little bit linked to other topics, and that's very important. And then we have the ITU, which it's a little bit separate because it's dominated by the member states, and currently, especially Asian countries are having a very strong role in ITU. ETSI is also kind of linked. That means there are collaboration agreements with them, but overall they are a little bit separate. And these agreements, really, these Vienna Frankfurt agreements are very important to avoid that here we have different standards. And here, for example, 30% of standards are really developed under the Vienna Agreement. And this is very important then also to consider the European single market. Sometimes also ISO mandates are involved in standardization activities when there is a so-called agreement between CEN and these other countries. Complementary to this Vienna agreement, we have the Frankfurt agreement. Here, the situation is a little bit different than in the other areas, because in general, standardization in the electrotechnical area is done only on the international level. Yeah? There's almost no activity anymore at the SAN level. That's very, very important to consider. There are guides how to deal with these different levels. That means how to adopt international standards as regional and national standards. For example, there is still the option to adopt, for example, as Germany, an international standards, but if you have some specific requirements, this can be then noted in then the German implementation. Some countries, especially outside Europe, although they are member of ISO, they implement then their national standards also from an industrial policy perspective, from a trade policy perspective, a little bit in a way which just creates then some barriers to trade, although there are international standards and everybody agrees on them, but at the end they really did little kind of make some deviations. Overall, one tries really to avoid double work. It's not always easy, and there are also sometimes clashes between organizations. Kind of a current topic where there is some competition, I would say, so is that this the digital product passport. There are heavy standardization activities going on at different levels. In Germany, they have a task force at the German Industry Association with, I think, 100 people. In Europe, there are massive kind of stakeholders involved. And I heard that China has a technical committee with 1,000 experts dealing with the digital product passport. Therefore, now there is a committee at the ISO level, and I'm curious how this is going to develop. A nice success story, I already mentioned 3GPP. This is a partnership across the world to really get a common mobile communication infrastructure. And you see here ETSI as the European representatives, but then here TTA from Korea, the Chinese organization. And they bring together the expertise in order then to have then kind of a common standardization landscape, especially in this very important domain of mobile communication. And therefore 3GPP has specific specifications, and ETSI then is implementing this as European or ETSI standards, and that's very important. Currently, there are also some concerns because ETSI is also dominated by non-European players, and the European Commission is not so happy sometimes with how the process is going to work. That was a little bit of a rush through the standardization landscape, and as you have seen, it's very specific and very dynamic. And just to sum this up, first message is, okay, please consider there's a difference between standards and regulation. That's very important. We have different types of standardization bodies, from formal bodies over consortia to de facto standards. And in Europe, there's a regulation which clarify which formal body is more or less has the authority from the European Commission to produce European standards. And that's very important. We have also important consortia, which, depending on the technology you are in, are often more important than the formal bodies. And then some big players are still able to create de facto standards, although it's very difficult nowadays for even big multinationals to create de facto standards. We have seen now that the charging system has been kind of standardized in a way that the specific way Apple kind of tried to push is not anymore possible. However, there are some concerns, especially in the AI and data context, that the US big techs maybe create their own data and AI standards. And we have to see whether this is going to work. There are different linkages between the different levels of formal SDOs, from the national European to the international ones, Dresden, Vienna agreements. Consortia and formal SDOs are also linked, ETSI, for example, with IEEE. One important new trend is in Europe that the European Commission has published different acts, AI Act, Data Act, Cybersecurity Act, and these acts require the development of standards which specify then these acts. And here, these linkages are becoming more important. And then these harmonized European standards are still voluntary, but from a legal perspective, they are close to be obligatory, not only from this legal, but also then from a market perspective. Overall, this is very dynamic. It's very context specific. And therefore, when relations change, competition becomes stronger depending when there's a new topic. Currently, there is certainly a little bit of rush to new areas like AI and another big topic, but I will show you that when we talk about the research standardization interface. In the area of quantum technology, there's also a race in standardization and competition between different organizations, which makes the life for us as researchers not necessarily easier. That's it for today. Thanks a lot for your time and for your attendance. And I hope to see you next week, next Thursday, same time, here again. When we talk a little bit more about the different functions of standards and which prepares then the step to the, I think, then the more interesting lectures on standardization and research, which is a little bit my hobby horse in the last 20 years. Thank you very much. But chat, thank you. So, Raul, wie beende ich das jetzt?
Just one addition.
Okay.
I saw there are some question left in the FAQs.
Okay.
So therefore, we will reach out to you regarding these questions and answer these questions with a short email, since we are quite short in time and we don't want you to wait longer than necessary. So therefore, we will end this meeting now, and we wish you a pleasant day and hope to see you at the next session. Bye-bye.